So we welcome you very much, appreciate you taking the time. Very excited to hear Forrester speak and hear their trends and thoughts. So if anyone would like to send any questions in or engage in conversation, you can see here it's at Bright Idea Headquarters, HQ, and we're doing hashtag innovation, hashtag trends. We welcome hearing from you. And there's always the obligatory who is Bright Idea. I saw in some of the registrations there were still a fair amount of folks that we have not worked with as much, so I'd like you to bear with me and take a couple minutes or seconds just to make sure you know who Bright Idea is as we're sponsoring the webinar. So we are a innovation software designed exclusively for innovation program leaders, and we position ourselves as a partner of choice for world-class companies seeking to build transformative, people-powered innovation, competency, and culture. So I think the part that's most important is, do we have customers? We have a lot of great name customers, including Accenture, Bayer, Chevron, Dell, GE, and Roche, and many more if you want to go to our website, which you can see here. So thank you for letting us take a moment there. And then the part that I know everyone really is interested in is hearing Forrester talk a little about innovation trends to watch and inspire you. So what we'll do now is jump into, excuse me, the poll. So Tahani, if you could help us calculate this. What we'd like for a moment before we have Chip Gliedman jump in from Forrester is ask you, how important does your management consider innovation? And if you could take a moment and fill this in, we'll leave the polls open for about 30 seconds, would be great. So Chip, what do you think? How important? What are you hearing from folks?
Well, it's well, I don't want to tell them what the right answer is, but obviously, the fact that there are people registered for the call, it's something that's becoming top of mind for a lot of folks within a lot of different companies. If you're having trouble selling the reason for it or whatever, we'll hopefully give you the tools for that. If you've already sold it, now have to figure out how to do it, we'll also work on trying to give you some hints for that piece too. But it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see where sort of just how important people do find it.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Let's see. Wow, critical, 60%. That's great to hear, and possibly why you're on the call. So, we thank you very much again for taking the time, and let's jump into why you're here. So I'm very, very honored and inspired already, tying in with the title of the topic here today, to introduce Chip Gliedman. He's the Vice President, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. And you can see here he's shared his contact information. And I do want to make sure everybody knows, again, we'll be sharing the slides and the record at the end of this. We also will leave about 10 minutes at the end for any questions. So again, you can see the area here in the Q&A, or you can tweet any questions that you have, and we will address all that we can. All right? So we're very, very interested in hearing from you, as well as having you hear from Chip. So Chip, very interested. What do you think about the poll results with the critical for 60%? And why do you believe that people are focused on innovation these days? It's certainly seeming to be a hot topic.
Well, it obviously is. It's a very hot topic, and obviously the people who've decided to spend their time with us, agree with that. It's interesting because I've probably talked to about 200 companies over the last 2 years or so, and about their innovation programs or what they're doing or how they're doing it. And I'd say that these days when I talk to a company, probably close to half of them have somebody who has, some direct responsibility for innovation, has innovation in their job title of some sort. So it's, it is something that more and more companies are beginning to appreciate, that you have to do it, and you have to have somebody dedicated to doing it. It's not something you can just do on your own. If you're part of the group that doesn't have somebody with an innovation job responsibility. Let me see. Yes, I think I have the clicker here. So I have the wand, so I can do that. So let me just help give you a little of the reason why we think it's so critical, and again to sort of point you to some things you can do to sell innovation to management, maybe to get some more funding. And it's actually part of a macroeconomic cycle that goes back, over 100 years. And if you look, we've seen a number of different big eras of different things that were important, and if you could control them, you could basically own and manage markets and have dominant market position. And so we started the early part of the 20th century where it was the organizations that mastered manufacturing. The ability to manufacture interchangeable parts goes back to the 1860s, 1850s. But it was really the organizations that mastered, the assembly line, mass production, that thrived in the first half of the 20th century. As we got through the 1950s and 60s, it became the companies who were able to master distribution, moving all of those things to the right place. As we moved into the 80s and 90s, it became the companies that were able to manage information best, who were able to take the dominant market position so that they would know what to build and where to move it. But what we found is that actually we're hitting a new era where the three other pieces are important, but now the customer is in fact much more in control of the relationship than they've ever been. It's and in fact we actually call it now the age of the customer. Each of these eras has different technologies and different conditions for growth, and in this age of the customer, you can see that the rise of social, the interconnectedness, mobile, have changed the dynamic of the way companies have to react to their marketplaces because customers are now reacting differently to companies. So we've defined this new era, the age of the customer, as a 20-year cycle in which the best companies will be the ones that can reinvent themselves, can take what they've learned over the past, period of time and understand and serve these increasingly powerful customers. So as we look at where this age of the customer fits in relation to the previous eras, as I said, the age of manufacturing, you saw Ford and GE, in the U.S. be the dominant, have dominant positions in their market. Distribution, you got companies like Walmart and Toyota begin to take over. Google, Amazon in the age of information. And now there's the opportunity for new players to come in and disrupt this market and in essence take over from where they were. An interesting thing about the way these market dynamics work, if you look at the companies that were in the Standard & Poor's 500 in 1950, the average company had been in business for 75 years. But I saw data for 2005, and the average company in the S&P 500 had been in business for 18 years. So there'd been a wholesale change. There's a wholesale change in dominant players as you make these changes from one cycle to the other. To now just sort of layer on top of that, everything we've learned in business classes about, the S-curves. If you sort of lay them sequentially, you see that each of these S-curves has, phases within, within the big phases, there are little phases. So you transition and you have to start exploring how to win in this new age. You have to figure out what'll work and then exploit it to take over the market. And then only after that point can you really look at optimizing and building, better systems and processes. So big companies that have been in business a long time have probably spent the last 10 or 15 years optimizing their existing processes. And now they're getting disrupted by the startups and the more nimble companies who've learned now to take advantage of this age of the customer, the social, the mobile, the new distribution channels, the availability of information. So, and then they've been able to jump on them, and for the startups, they're now exploiting them. And you can see those positions, and you can see that in virtually every industry. Companies that had dominant positions 10 years ago, whether it's media, whether it's consumer, in fact, whether it's B2B, they're all completely different. So you have to start thinking of how you're going to innovate, how you're going to jump off of that optimize curve and move on to the explore curve. And when you do it, you have to change the dynamic because, optimize, you're honing processes, you're maximizing profits. But in this explore phase where we're innovatively looking at attacking new markets and opening new opportunities and meeting new threats, it's a different value proposition. It's one where we're looking to create options. And then as those options begin to look promising, then we look at exploiting them and building the business value. It's a different world. We have to look at it differently. And literally, we have to be innovative in order to succeed.
Chip, along this path, can companies just shift their focus, or do they really need to make fundamental changes? What do you think?
Oh, it's fundamental. We've bred risk out of so many of our processes and our decisions over the last, 10 or 15 years. There's almost the expectation that something, you invest in is going to work. And that's not the case with innovation. We've got stable markets, we've got stable products, we've got stable customers. But we now have to think about how we're actually going to almost reinvent all of these aspects of our business. Good, actually, yeah, good. So one thing that we did is we actually took this big problem, how do you reinvent yourself, and we start to break it down into smaller problems. Because if you have smaller problems, it's easier to address them. So there's actually there's 4 different categories that are generally accepted as areas in which you can innovate. This is actually the same 4 categories into the goals are used by OECD to talk about innovation and the economics of innovation on a global scale. These 4 were actually 4 of the 5 that were defined in the early 30s and 40s by some of the economists in their thinking. But you can actually think about product innovation, process innovation, organizational innovation, and market innovation. So does a product can you develop or innovate there? Can you meet a deficiency or create a new offering? In process, this process that you've been using for 10 years or even 2 years, still appropriate? Are there ways that you can, reorganize the way people work together, the way they share information, the way where they're co-located potentially to give you a more innovative way of doing business? And likewise, is there a way for you to address your market in a different way? So you really have to think about changing all of these things, across the areas. Let me expand on it a little bit. I started to talk about how you have to make that fundamental change. If you look at the domain of ideas, of making a change to what you're doing, from an incremental change to your product, process, market, or organization, all the way to a radical change, we're used to working in this area on the left. Standardized, low risk, there's usually a business case. You're taking something you've got and making it incrementally better. That's the optimized world. Over on the other extreme, now you're talking about things like buying companies or making major pushes into a new geography or a new market. They're usually, game-changing, large-scale, high-risk. The piece in the middle is really what we're talking about. How do you build something between these two and have it sustainable and have it be something that's ongoing? Because this piece in the middle is, in fact, very different. You don't want it to be, episodic. You don't want to wait for that one idea to come along. You want to be continually feeding in new ones. And the processes, the things that you've honed, the things that you're running your organization on and you're making your investment decisions on today aren't appropriate for this sustained innovation world. And you have different success metrics and different failure metrics. And if you actually lay these 3 different sort of realms in this domain of idea next to each other, you can see that, most notably the one in red, the target success rate for the incremental, once something makes it through a governance process, you kind of want to make sure that it's going to have that 100% success rate we talked about, or I talked about. Something that it gets funded, a project or a product in many organizations, the expectation is it's going to be delivered and it's going to meet all the terms in the business case. And on the other side, you generally speaking are going to do a lot of work up front, at the management level and, with high-powered consultants and a lot of analysis to make sure that you can pull it off. And because it's so big and so game-changing, you basically also need a 100% success rate. But when you're playing in this middle realm, you don't have enough information to write a business case. It sounds like a good idea, but there's still a lot of questions. Does the market want it? Is it big enough? Can we build it, cheaply enough? Can we support it? Are there any legal or privacy issues? There's just, so the process of innovating is the process of answering these questions. And you have to start looking at success metrics that are more in line with what you might find at a venture capital firm. Because in a sense, venture capitalists are the funding arm of the innovators. And a venture capitalist who's building a portfolio of investments is not looking for a 100% success rate. If they're expecting it, they're not taking enough risk. They're not looking far enough afield. They're not being venture capitalists. They're just being, standard investors. So we need to think about how do we bring the same kind of mindset that you'd find at a VC firm, which is high risk, high reward, inside an organization that's generally speaking designed for a low risk, low return, but solid return. It's a different process, and it's one that we're finding many organizations have a hard time making.
Chip, a question for you is, this is, can clearly be pretty hard. For anyone who can't see, because I see there's a line through it, 50 to 80% is where the arrows are pointing. And what are some of the issues, Chip, that people need to get over or address to attain the high levels of success?
Oh, wow. Let's see. We actually did a survey. It's probably about 18 months old now, but, as I said, I talk to, probably multiple companies every week about, what problems they're having or how they can jumpstart what they're doing, or where they're being successful. And so, I really believe that there's a lot of truth still to them, whether, the percentage points are one or two off. I think that you'll get a sense that, the categories are still appropriate and the relative scale is probably right. The top two are money and time and people. The top two are three things. Time and people and money are two categories. We seem to continually find that people have a hard time getting their organizations to dedicate the time and people to run a true innovation program. They expect the results, but they're not willing to, allocate the resources. And even if there is an innovation program that may be staffed with a few people, when it comes time to actually take the good ideas and start incubating them and working with them, they're not willing to give people up, the time from their regular job to allow them to explore those ideas. Because the departments that those people work for still have quarterly goals, and their managers may not be willing to put the quarterly numbers at risk for the long-term health of the company. Same thing comes with the budget. The finance people always want to see an ROI. But it's very hard to come up with an ROI when you can't write a business case because you don't have the information yet. So getting the funding for the innovation program is probably the number two. Says structured process or procedure is number three, but if you look below it, you'll see that basically there's four different ways to say that culture is a major aspect of it. And culture is the risk reward model. It's how willing are you as an organization to nurture people who are willing and able to step outside of their comfort zone. The fear of failure, commitment, and the desire to try something new, or the thought that their business can't be innovative. You can see that those four together really represent more of the DNA of the company rather than something that can just be turned on or off like resources or time. So that's the big one. It's something of our own doing. As I said, we've built it so that everybody should be saying the same thing and should be acting the same way. And the processes have been optimized and everybody's been trained on them to do it the right way. That it's very hard for people sometimes to step up and step out of their box there. So that becomes a big issue for them. So one of the things we did to help companies over that is we thought about what they really need to invest in order, in terms of skills and capabilities to get over some of these humps. And we built something we call a sort of a capability map. What are the basic capabilities that any innovation program has to have or be able to deliver on in order to succeed? And they work out to be sort of 9 basic capabilities that organize themselves into 3 layers. At the highest level, obviously, you have to come up with the ideas and have the process to incubate and nurture them. And hopefully, if you're doing this on a sustained basis, you'll have, a portfolio of these that you're going to be managing. Like a venture capitalist, you're going to be investing in a number of different ideas across those 4 different categories I was talking about. You need to have implementation capabilities, change management. You have to be able to incentivize people to participate, as opposed to beat them up if they come up with an idea that ends up not being as successful as they might have wanted it to be. And the communications plan to get the program going and to ensure that people do participate. And then underneath that, 3 different control structures. One for governance, what is the process you're going to have, the funding, and the measurement. And you can see that, as you look at it, you have to be able to create a safe climate for the new ideas. You need to take your project management, the people who are given the task of getting something from point A to point B, and they're usually motivated to make sure that happens almost at any cost. But with innovation, it's more iterative, and if something is not working, you put it on the shelf. It might be for technical reasons, it might be for market reasons, it might be for whatever reasons, but you have to, in a sense, get these people conditioned to potentially let go on something if the time and something isn't right. You never want to be able to, you want to hear, that's not how we do it. That's the death of any innovation program. If you say to somebody, why don't we try this? And they go, that's not how we do it. Well, maybe this is how we should do it. So change management becomes critical. The incentives, I mentioned it before, has to be relevant to the people and to the program. Distinct governance. Most governance processes, are designed to mitigate risk. In this case, we need a governance process that's lightweight, accepts risk, but at the same time, manages the investments in a logical way. You don't want them to be overmanaged, but you certainly also don't want them to be undermanaged. The funding has to be there, and with it, I would really highly recommend you look at incremental funding. Funding on top of and separate from the ongoing, funding for existing products and services. The same thing I mentioned earlier about the people. It's hard to pull a person out of a department so that they can work on an innovation program. or an innovative idea, because you're potentially putting that quarter's numbers, somewhat at risk, or that quarter's plans. Same thing happens with the funding. If you go to the marketing department and say, I need $50,000 to pursue an idea that might pay out, in 18 months, the manager of that budget is going to be thinking about, what are they going to do to make this quarter's numbers versus 18 months from now's numbers. So you're really better off having the commitment to funding separate and above the ongoing operational metric. And measurement. You need to have an appropriate measurement plan. Different success metrics, very different success metrics from what you've been using for your existing programs. So you look at it, and across the board, the skills are not hard, but they're different. And that's what makes it challenging to get one of these programs at a company that's been doing something one way for a long time.
Great. So, Chip, this is really valuable information, and yet I know a lot of folks hear the buzzwords that are going around about innovation, open innovation, crowdsourcing, hackathons, crowdfunding, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit in terms of how these play into innovation programs?
Sure, happy to. And then feel free to throw in any more during in the questions or chat or whatever, and we'll try to tick them off one after the other. So when you think about open innovation, what we're looking to do is to broaden the pool of ideas we get. How do we go from having a defined group in the product organization, for research and development, who looks at how we might, build or extend our products? How do we expand from just inside of our marketing department and looking at how we're going to address our markets? And the same thing, processes or organization. Classically, we look at people within those groups to generate the ideas for improving them. But in fact, when you look at open innovation, what you're really trying to do is open up that pool to more and more people. So if we start in the firm, we can actually look at open innovation even inside the firm. So for example, the customer service and salespeople may be your best source of information about products and processes. Since they touch the customers probably more than anyone else at your organization, they also deal with other companies where they have good experiences and indifferent experiences and bad experiences. So do they have something that they've experienced or their spouse has experienced in dealing with another company in another market that might allow you to address your customers in your market better? So opening up the product and process piece to people in some other departments, non-traditional departments, is one way to begin to get open, innovation more open. And then we can also look at expanding it. Your partners, can you together come up with ideas that might improve process or product or market penetration? Your suppliers, keeping an eye on your competitors, talking to your customers. I mean, many companies have, customer advisory boards, but you need, a listening platform. You need to be potentially opening up the ideas you're getting from your customers. The classic example that everybody who talks about innovation using is the My Starbucks Ideas site, where Starbucks customers post ideas for new processes and products. And Starbucks has, over the last few years adopted, some number of hundreds of these ideas and implemented them in their stores. But you can also potentially think about some non-traditional markets. And by the way, in terms of customers, we're not necessarily even talking about, we could be talking about the public in general. NASA every year does something they call the International Space Apps Challenge. And they have 9,000 people who contribute ideas and solutions and suggestions to how they can, better use the International Space Station and some of the data sets that are coming out of it, or other governmental data sets, to provide, better services and better capabilities, across many different areas. But you can also, again, look at things like academic and research institutions. What ideas are coming out of there? Most large academic institutions have their own internal research groups, and potentially, are willing to license some of the ideas and technologies that have come out of those research groups. So expand your ecosystem to scan these other areas and see what might be available. And then likewise, things like, government and regulatory bodies are making data sets available. The U.S. federal government has something like 100,000 data sets that are now available for people to use. Is there something there that you can use to, perhaps bring a new product to market or a new service to market? So there's lots and lots of ways to take innovation and open it up. Actually, I think I actually said it. So employees, give them the time. Customers, they can, to go back and add the incentive to this. Why should people participate? Well, a customer might be willing to work with you to solve a problem they have because they will be able to get it before anybody else. Commercialization motivations, as I mentioned, on academia. Suppliers, the two of you can work together. Shared profits or some value-based pricing contract can motivate some of these people to help you and, as I said, make your innovation more open. So that's the open innovation. What other ones did we want to talk about? Crowdfunding. Okay, I said crowdfunding. Yeah. So crowdfunding fits into the same motion. We want to expand what we're doing and how we're doing it. So I don't have a picture for it, but when you think about it, to get an idea to market, there are four main players. There's the inventor, the person who comes up with an idea. There's a transformer, which is the one who takes that idea and figures out how to turn it into something that has business value. There's a financier, which is the funding for that process. And then there's a broker, which is someone who keeps all the pieces working together. In most cases, the people in the innovation program are the brokers. They're bringing in the subject matter experts, the inventors, the transformers, the finances, and making sure that this process keeps moving. A lot of times the funding comes from inside the organization that wants to do the transformation. But in other cases, you can look to external sources. So if you are an inventor and now need to transform some idea, you can now go to the crowd, things like YouFundMe, or other funding platforms, and in a sense fill that role with people out in the open ecosystem. It doesn't necessarily have to be within that same organization. So open innovation is expanding the first two pieces, the inventor and transformer. Crowdfunding is expanding out that financier role to now include people who are tangentially impacted by this. So you can see how you can begin to take and weave together this whole thing. So crowdsourcing, open innovation, crowdfunding is all part of expanding the ecosystem. Hackathons are a little different. So if we go back to my last picture of the capability map, the process of going and getting the ideas and incubating them to start with the invention and transforming it is where we begin to see hackathons working. And in a sense, a hackathon is a way to compress down that process. So I mentioned the open innovation that NASA does. It's actually, could be classified as a hackathon, because what they do is they run that program over a weekend in something like some 40 or 50 or 70 locations around the world. They have 9,000 people participating. And it runs, as I said, over a weekend. And it's designed to figure out what to do to make that in a very compressed amount of time, come up with as many ideas as possible. I heard of an interesting hackathon that took place actually at Johns Hopkins, I believe. And the theme there was to figure out how to hack, how to fix, or make better this is hack in a good sense, not hack in a go in and steal password sense. But a hack is a way to basically take something and do it differently or make it better. And so what they were looking to do was bring together people and just on a very concentrated basis, see if it was possible to come up with some ideas to fix the containment suit that Ebola caregivers were using. Because apparently it's very hot and humid climate, and it's very difficult for the people who are treating patients of Ebola to move and work in the full body spacesuits that they have to. So they brought people together. They brought together fabric and material and tools, and had different teams work together, amongst themselves and between each other, see what they could do to hack the Ebola suit. And over the course of the weekend, the winning team, the one that seemed to come up with the most promising ideas, made made a few changes that, when you look at them in retrospect, they seem simple and logical, but they were, in a sense, new. The first change is that they moved the zipper to the back. So rather than have these things be a two-piece suit that they step into in the bottom and the top, it's now become sort of a one-piece thing with a zipper in the back that they sort of step into from the back. But what that allows them to do is to get out of it by folding it forward and keeping the contaminated surface farther away from them. And the second thing they figured out is that all it would take would be putting in a packet of silica gel into the suit to keep the humidity level down. And by keeping the humidity down, by absorbing the moisture, it kept the people cooler because if they were sweating, it would be able to evaporate, and it would keep the plexiglass face shields, the plastic face shields, clear because they wouldn't be fogging up. So that was a hackathon. It had nothing to do with computers or technology or anything else. It was designed to bring people together to solve that problem, and they did it in a very concentrated way. So hackathons are a way of compressing it down. You obviously, potentially trade breadth for speed, but it's just a matter of accelerating the program. So
great. This is very interesting. Would love to hear your summary of the trends here, and then we'll jump into a poll, Chip.
Sure. To sort of wrap things up a bit here. I talked a little bit about the macro trends and some of the specific innovation trends. So the disruption we talked about is forcing people to innovate. That's why hopefully all of you are seeing that interest you are. Create options. Don't when you're working in an innovation program, don't worry so much about ROI, but talk about what you're doing as creating options. And I'm really using the financial version of the word options here. It's the right to do something in the future, because those kinds of options are assets. So having these things sort of, percolating around and ready to be commercialized if everything points in the right direction, is building assets for your company. And if you try to sell this to management, what you're really doing is mitigating the market against market risk and market volatility by creating these options. And then you're going to generate the business value as that S-curve kicks up and you find something promising. As you start hearing the terms, open innovation, you talk about, expanding the people who play and generate the ideas, and crowdsourcing is the same. Crowdfunding is the financier, again, making that open. And the hackathon part is the ideation. So there's nothing mysterious about these ideas. What they are different ways to keep this innovation program and process going.
Great. So very, very informative on the innovation trends, Chip. And now I think we'd like to move to do a poll, just so that the folks on the phone know this is the information we've shared on trends. And now we're going to take a few minutes and talk about, okay, if you have an innovation program, how do you get started? How do you get moving? What are some of the things to consider? And so first we wanted to do a poll just to understand where folks are on their formal innovation program. So you can see it here right in front of you. And then we'll talk for a few minutes on how do you get up and running. So does your forum have a formal innovation program? If you could let us know. No, we don't need one. No, but we're discussing or planning to have one in the future. Yes, we don't use it much. Or we're struggling to get ramped, or it works pretty well. Yes, it rocks. It's solid. It's great, whatever the new hip terms are these days, but we don't see success from it. And number 7, yes, it rocks. We see the outcomes and successes. So if you could take a minute to fill in, we'd love to hear from you. So Chip, maybe while we're filling that
out. By the way, I'm going to ignore anyone who says A at this point, because I'm going to assume that they're just doing it to spite us.
Oh, 2%.
Okay, whoever that one person was, I want your number. I'm coming after you.
So it looks like, people are struggling to get ramped. There's about 41%. So I'm happy to let you know that the next few slides will take you through in terms of some of the things we can do to help, or that Forrester recommends we can do to help in terms of methodology and getting rolling. So Chip, one of the questions that came in that's very related is, if someone is considering putting more emphasis on their innovation program, how do they start, which I think you're ready to address? And if someone already has a program, what should they think about to increase its effectiveness?
Boy, I love it when people set you up. Just happen to have a couple of slides on that topic. So, again, if you're just starting, hopefully I've given you some things you can use to try to justify it to management. You really need the buy-in from the top. You can't do this unless you get some level of senior management to buy into the notion that this is a good use of time and resources. Play the financial angle. The one thing that everyone within a company understands is money. And if their money is at risk because the market is changing or conceivably changing, or if they don't see it changing today, they have to make the assumption that it could potentially change in the future. And get them to commit something to mitigate against that risk. And you do that by buying these options. Another thing that we find is that if you talk about it from the solution side rather than the technology side, so rather than talking about mobile technology, if you talk about what keeps you awake at night, if you're a marketing person or a product person or a salesperson, what do you think is going to keep you awake at night, 12 or 18 months from now? then you can go out and look at, whether mobile might be a technology that would help you to mitigate against that risk of lack of sleep. So think about it in terms of solving the problems. Invention is great, but innovation is invention turned into business value. Keep it simple. Don't overthink things. Don't worry about, understand that you need a different process and governance, but don't think that you have to do it yourself. Generally speaking, if you buy a tool, there will be a basic process or a choice of different processes implemented as a default within that tool. If you pick the tool to meet your needs, the likelihood is you'll get a process to meet your needs. And then refine them as you go. Another part is, about if you're getting started, remember you have to deal with the cultural issues. That there are no bad ideas in innovation. You have to work on getting people to be willing to come up and voice their concerns and their ideas and participate. And that things that are said within an innovation program or tool, are safe as opposed to, in a more traditional corporate type world. Learn to tell success stories. What's in it for me? Again, thinking more from the, imagine if your customers could do this. Imagine if we did not have to worry about this process. So you have to be able to tell the story from the ears of the listener, so that what comes out of your mouth is processed through this "what's in it for me" filter by the person listening, and be able to craft that story in a way that is relevant to them. And the last one, which whether you're starting or whether you've been doing it, is to banish the word "no" from your vocabulary. If you're involved in an innovation program, you should never use the word "no" in relation to any idea or concept. Replace it with "yes, if." So, should we make, this new widget? Yes, if. Yes, if it meets this need. Yes, if we can manage it, well, if we can do it this way, if we can solve this problem, if we can buy it cheap enough. Should we change this process? You never want to, is this a good way to change this process? You don't want to say no. You want to say yes, if. And that's absolutely critical to both the culture and the thinking and the progressing and this incubation and this sort of turning it into a blender rather than a funnel. I really don't like the concept of a funnel. A funnel implies that you actually are saying no to some large number of ideas. I kind of better like the idea of a blender where they're all going in and they're getting stirred together, and some are percolating up and coming back out the top because they're the ripest ones. But the rest are still in there and blending around, and maybe in the future they'll be the right ones. So it's a different mindset. And if you're doing it, so, I've shown a bunch of pictures, and I know that you're going to get the slides, but look at some of the ones. Look at that innovation ecosystem one. And think about how you might be able to expand your own ecosystem and include some of those other partners or get things from some of those other players. Think about, where you're putting your efforts. And are you looking at really having a portfolio that would be like a venture capitalist with investments in product, process, market, and organization, with the right emphasis based on what your organization or your company is looking for? Are you heavy on needing product innovation, or you have a lot of those and now really should be doing more in process and maybe running challenges in areas where you may be a little weak? Think about it. Go, look at the way venture capitalists talk about their portfolios and think and communicate them like them. Again, swap the innovation funnel for the innovation blender. And in this case, I also said talk about your successes. If you've been doing it a while, hopefully you'll be able to trace the line from some idea now to some market success. Whereas early on, your successes may be about process and number of people participating, more operational. If you've been doing it a while, now begin to think about layering in outcome metrics and talking about your wins in terms of the business value created. How you're starting to move up the S-curve with some of the things that have come out of the innovation program. Keeping it going in that way and stepping up your capabilities, those 9 different categories that I talked about. You have different incentives you can use to bring a different group of people in. Look at your process. Are you generating enough and fast enough to keep things going? So use some of those pictures to help frame your own internal evaluation of how well you're doing, and step up your game a little bit more, and see if you can end up on our slide for the winners in the age of the customer.
Chip, this is a great presentation, and I see we have a little over 5 minutes, so I want to make sure to have a chance to jump into Q&A. So just for everyone to remember, we are tracking in social at Bright Idea HQ, #innovation, #trends. And Chip, really, really great presentation, very informative, but I'm going to jump right into the Q&A as we promised, okay?
Great.
So a couple ones that came in earlier was one, so should innovation become a core component of strategic planning?
Core component of strategic planning. Well, strategic planning should also have, needs to be thought of as a portfolio. How do you take the systems and processes and products you have and make, buy, sell, hold decisions on them? Which ones are you going to continue or improve? What are you going to do next for, the next 1 to 4 quarters? But then likewise, how are you going to begin to start looking, into second and third time horizons? That would be the 12 to 60 months out. So yes, absolutely. Organizations that do formal scenario planning start looking at alternative ways the world may be in 3 to 5 years. Not that one of them has a higher or likelier or probability of occurring, but they are potentials that they can occur. And then they work back and they say, well, what would we need to see for that world to occur? And then they begin to prepare themselves, because as those things, if they should start to develop, they are ready to jump on them because they've already thought it through, that they're now moving from, a scenario that they expect to one that they didn't. So part of this formal scenario planning should be looking at threats to your market, threats to your product, new players, and using the innovation program to directly hit those long-term threats, as part of that corporate or departmental strategic planning process. Absolutely.
Okay, great. So another question, which is better for a company's innovation program, external crowdsourcing platforms or internal crowdsourcing platforms, and why?
This is a personal bias, but I would start internally before working externally. And the reason I would say that is because it's easier. Number one, it's fairly simple to implement most of these platforms and link them into your internal directories. It's easy to manage internal communications. From a intellectual property point of view, any idea that's generated by an employee while they're working for you is generally considered to be the property of the company. When you work on the outside world, you now have to, if nothing else, deal with, people you don't know and how good those ideas are, and whether or not there might be any licensing or intellectual property issues. In terms of open platforms for the outside world, you're potentially not going to get your suppliers and partners to participate in them if they're open, because they're not going to want to suggest an idea that their competition might see. It's not to say you can't. There are firms that have been very successful in terms of open innovation, but if given the choice between open and internal, it's easier to do the internal and then learn from that and expand to the external.
Okay, great. So I have quite a few questions on metrics, so I'm going to try to combine these. How do you define the criteria to measure ideas and innovation? Really, how is success typically measured? And what are the areas that you should be looking at to track relative to the regular normal metrics that people track in the company? So what's different and what should you be focused on?
Well, okay, well, what's different is that you're not going to have the ROI, at least at first. So in terms of metrics, you can be looking at which metrics you want to be applying to various different, how mature you are and what different roles you're using. So if you're starting a program, you're going to want to be looking at probably at first fairly operational metrics. The number of people participating, the number of ideas being generated per challenge, the number of people commenting on those ideas, the number of, the amount of time it took to vet those ideas. And by the way, the vetting and deciding what you're going to invest in, every idea needs to be read. Every idea needs to be acknowledged. You cannot necessarily assume that the idea that has the most votes is the best idea. It's just the one that most people understand very often. It might be the best idea, but the one that's not quite as comprehensible may in fact be that extra step or two farther out that you're looking for. So votes per se might not be a good one, but you do obviously want participation. You want that participation to expand. Unfortunately, I've seen too many programs where the first challenge gets 200 ideas submitted, the second one 50, and the third one 5. And it's usually because people, they stick to that funnel idea. So the 200, then they say, we funded 5. Well, there's 195 people who felt like they wasted their time. And the second one, they do 50, and they fund 3. Well, then there's 47 more who feel like they wasted their time. So you have to be very careful with the communication. You want that number to go out and get bigger as this program gets more and more entrenched in the organization. So as I said, so you'll be looking at operational things there. Later on, you'll be looking at, the number of the ideas that have been turned into products. And then eventually potentially things like revenue from products that have been in the market for less than a year, or revenue or market share for products that have, that were originally generated from inside the innovation program. So you can, be layering these things. You're going to have different metrics that are key based on, which role you're taking. The inventor, the transformer, the financier, or the broker. You can begin to see how I think you can put those together.
Okay, great, Chip. I realize we're top of the hour, so a couple things. One, there's quite a few questions. Are you getting slides? You will get the slides and you will get the report. Also, Renee, I see your message and we will absolutely reach out to you, so thank you. And Chip, I'm going to just see if we can do maybe 2 more minutes of questions, so maybe brief answers, but at least make sure we're addressing some of the key ones that have come in here. Is that okay?
I can't say the N word, right? Because I'm supposed to banish it. So right. Yes, if I know the answers.
Okay, so this is, I think, a short one. Best approach for incentives.
It's surprisingly it can be as simple as putting somebody's picture on the wall in the hall. A program that I find that I've worked with a couple of companies on is to give somebody to name 10 people a year, if it's a big organization, as quote-unquote innovation fellows. It means nothing other than they participated and helped in the innovation program, either by having a good idea or doing, yeoman work on the process or contributed and helped refine them. But, let them put it on their business card or give it to them as an honorary title for, 2015 Innovation Fellow. That's all it takes sometimes to incentivize people, is just to keep them going. You have to be be a little bit careful depending upon geography about giving people money because it comes in as compensation. but you can be anything from, you know, a T-shirt and recognition all the way through a piece of the action if it ends up saving or generating revenue.
Great, great. Okay, so we'll just do two more quick ones here. There's a question that came in, and Julie, we're happy to talk to you directly if it helps, but she's asking the question in terms of how do you organize everything in the whole process? There's so many ideas that come in, you know, in the program that it's hard to know what to prioritize with all the submissions. So how do you manage it?
Build a simple matrix that you can use to rank things. And it's a longer question than I can answer in a minute. But, you know, think about how appropriate it is for your company and think about how much resources it's going to take to make happen. Think about when it might hit in terms of this is something that's, you know, potentially 6 months or 60 months away. And think about, you know, how big a hit this could be. Those are just 4 really simple categories. And, you know, have a group of subject matter experts or people who are running the challenge just quickly read each idea and rank them across those 4 categories. Again, you want to acknowledge and thank everyone for every idea, but that's just a really simple one, and we can take it many more steps. I have an internal matrix I use that has 13 categories into 3 different buckets. There's lots of different things. And most of the tools have some basic ranking, but just don't just go with you know, thumbs up, thumbs down, likes as the default. You need to do a little bit more than that when you're ranking these things.
Okay, great, great. And Julie, we're happy to reach out if there's any other questions. Obviously, having the right software programs makes sense. So that was a quick little plug there for Bright Idea if anyone didn't catch that. So anyway, thank you everybody for the time that you've spent today. Hopefully you found this very informative. I know I did. Chip, and I should correct the name of Chip Gliedman, not Gliedman. So we're just thinking we'd be gliding right through the slides, which we did. So really, really informative, so thank you. And you can see on the WebEx here right now, the paper offer. It's free. So again, we've been talking about innovation programs and trends. Thought this might be insightful. And again, thank you everybody for your time. Thank you, Chip. It's been very, very informative. Have a great day, everybody.